Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 3 o'clock. And again, we are very lucky to have a very special speaker for this afternoon session on silent signals, how classroom environment shapes student behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker from the University of Asia in the Pacific, the School of Education and Human Development, and she's the head of the Child Development and Education Center. Please welcome Ms. Melissa Antoinette Garcia.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sir Man, for the introduction. It's nice to see familiar names in this Zoom room today. Now, familiar names. Okay, so let me just pull up my screen. All right, do you see my screen now? Yes. All right. Um, so for this session, this is our goal and our topics at a glance. So, why are we having this talk today? Our goal is to help you teachers design the learning environment that quietly shape student behavior, belonging, and focus through physical structures and symbolic cues. So, we will learn more about those terminologies later. And to get to that, what are we going to talk about in detail? So we'll talk about the environment as the third teacher and the structural environment as well as the symbolic environment, which essentially are our silent signals. Okay, now what do we mean exactly by silent signals? Right? Um before we even speak, right? The moment that our students arrive in school, our classrooms already does the talking, right? So the light, the lighting, the sounds, the layout of the classroom, each of those elements, they send messages to our students, right? So when our students approach our classroom, they'd think, okay, is this a place of calm or chaos? Or is it a place of belonging or where I'll feel isolated? Right. So today we'll explore all those silent signals. So the way our classroom environment shape student behavior, self regulation, and learning. So without us having to use our voices. And to understand that, we turn to one of the most used framework, a simple but powerful framework, the idea that our environment isn't just a backdrop of learning. Rather, it teaches alongside us. And that idea comes from the Reggio Emilia perspective. Any one of you who are familiar with the Reggio Emilia perspective, can I see a raise of thumb if you are? Okay. All right. So might be something new, might be something that you've heard of, but don't actually know in detail what it is. So the Reggio approach actually it offers one of the most, should I say, beautiful ways to think about our teaching spaces, right? Um, teachers who subscribe or schools who subscribe to the Reggio approach believe that children learn through relationships, and those relationship include relationship with people, relationship with ideas, and importantly, relationship with the learning environment as well. So, like what I mentioned a while ago in Reggio, the environment isn't a backdrop for learning. The environment is a teacher in itself, right? So that's what they call a third teacher alongside us adults and the peers also. So again, this means that every corner, um, every object, every color that we use inside the classroom, every arrangement of furniture inside the classroom should be intentional. So whatever happens there, it communicates values, expectations, and it either invites or inhibits exploration. So again, the environment, it teaches without even saying a word. And let's go deeper into what the Reg approach says. So um according to the Reg philosophy, the environment mirrors values, right? So we should consider the classroom as a living space. So it should reflect what the community, what the people in it believes about children and learning, right? So when our students walk into our classroom, um for example, your classroom is filled with light, with natural textures, with accessible materials and traces of their own work. So that kind of classroom communicates, oh, you matter, you belong, and your thinking and your learning has value. That's on one side. Now if we go on the opposite side, like a space that's cluttered, a space that's harshly lit, dimly lit, and an adult centered um classroom communicates the opposite, right? So this space is actually just for control. Now space is also an invitation to learn. So again, the Regia classrooms are intentionally designed to provoke curiosity, right? So again, they're organized in such a way that it sparks that question with students. So in the Reggio inspired practice, um, they often have provocations, right? And it is through those provocations that's how the teachers speak. So what are those provocations really? So a provocation is a carefully designed setup, right? So it could be a display, could be a question, an object, the space in itself, which silently invites students to wonder, to explore, to make meaning out of what's presented to them. So the provocation that you have inside your classroom doesn't have to tell them, oh, do this with exclamation points, right? So a provocation and a silent invitation asking our students, oh, what might happen if? And that's the silent signal. So our environment, communicating with our students, teaching our students without words. Okay. So, for example, when your materials inside their classroom are visible to your students, are within the reach of your students, what does that what's the message that puts forward? So that signals trust in them, and that they have the autonomy to make, to create, to try to explore. Now if your for example, if your furnitures are your piece of furniture are movable, so they can tell the, oh, there's flexibility in this classroom, I'm able to collaborate with others. So what about if your um if your centers are well defined, so that signals clarity and safety. So for example, they know where the quiet corner is. They know where the collaborative corner is. So they know exactly how they will regulate, and how they will be using those spaces. So again, every part of our classroom invites certain behaviors, right? So the environment that we provide our students provokes thinking when it asks and doesn't give answers really. So the silent signal framework, the space, the visuals, the rituals are the conditions that make those provocations possible, right? So a calm corner, an ordered reading nook, for instance, that invites stillness, peace and quiet, and then a visible collaboration zone that invites discussion. And then um a warm, personalized classroom, even just a wall, would invite ownership from our students, right? So we have to understand that in our classrooms, nothing is accidental. Every piece of the classroom says something to our learners. Okay, and then according to Reggio, also beauty is a form of respect. So um aesthetics, right? So that's a buzzword in the last what, a year or two. And Reggio subscribes to that also. But for Reggio, schools aren't just about being pretty, right? They're also about, should I say, it's also about dignity, right? So the Reggio philosophy believes that children deserve beauty in their surrounding. There should be order, there should be harmony, to nurture that frame of mind that allows for learning to happen. So that means that the tone of the classroom matters. So natural lighting, simple and consistent color palette. What else? Uh, so when you have that consistent color palette, you do not provide visual overload for the students. So incorporation of living plants, textures, authentic materials. So instead of plastics and clutter. So that's what they're seeing, that aesthetics is it actually translates to ethics, because beauty tells students that, oh, they're worth the effort of curating the environment. So another thing is that the environment should um document learning, right? So the walls should not be filled with decorations. Rather, they should be filled with evidence of learning, right? So student work is displayed, annotated if needed, revisited by the students themselves. So you see, the environment evolves with the learning journey of our students. So for example, um, in the case here in the Philippines, there's a lot of us are, we can admit to us being having this kind of um what do you call this, predictable habit of hanging posters. Before, our teachers would, when I was growing up, my teachers would even buy the ready-made posters from National Bookstore. So you'll see there the multiplication table, you'll see there the alphabet chart. So now, what does a classroom that sends out silent signal entail? So instead of hanging posters from a catalog or ready-made one, so post a photo sequence of, for example, if you're a science teacher, post a photo sequence of the class experiment that you did, right? So instead of a rule chart, for instance, you can also display like a co-created class promise, right? So that will transform the walls into a learning tool as well. So it's not just a static wallpaper. Okay. And the environment should support relationships, right? Learning is social. So the layout of our classrooms and the materials should help children connect. Where will they connect? To each other, to the teachers, to the idea, to the materials. So tables, and um, your other fixtures inside the classroom should be arranged so that socialization could be encouraged. Some place where materials are shared, spaces are open enough for movement, but also intimate enough for collaboration, right? So, for example, if you want your students to talk to each other, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, can they actually see each other, right? So, if you want calm transitions inside your classroom, do the spaces, do the pathway, yung dadaanan natin, dadaanan nila. Do those pathways make sense? Or do they stir chaos, right? So usually, if we think about it, behavior, behavioral issues often have architectural causes, right? So again, the importance of the learning environment. And lastly, we have to understand also that the environment evolves with learners. So the classroom is not static. It should change throughout the school year as, for example, projects grow, interests of our students shift. It should change depending on the theme for the month, for example. So again, rotate the displays based on the current thematic unit that you are in. Rearrange furniture to match the the lesson style, and we can also invite our learners to actually suggest changes that can happen inside the classroom. So when the room, when our classrooms evolve with our students, they feel a sense of belonging. I belong here. It changes with me, right? So now connecting the understanding of Reggio to research now. So this philosophy, um, it has intuited what modern science now confirms, right? So science and psychology confirms that the quality of the classroom design accounted for 16% of academic performance variation across around 4,000 students. So that includes the naturalness, so the light, the air, the temperature, the kind of stimulation also that's inside your classroom. So the colors that you use, the visual balance, and the individualization. So the flexibility that we were talking about a while ago. And then research study also demonstrated that here, these are the two words that we will dive into deeper today: the structural environment and the symbolic environment. So those two features influence achievement, engagement, and belonging, right? So again, if your environment now is your third teacher, what is your classroom actually teaching right now? Right? Something for us to think about. So what story does your classroom tell about learning, about belonging, and about care? Yeah, so let's start with that environment. And not just what it means, but how it feels. So moving forward now, we'll take a look at how these structures build or break the behavior of our students. Okay. So before we even talk about the tone or the routines, we have to check the structural health of our classrooms first, right? So, um, what are the things that we have to check for us to call our classroom functional? So, when a room is too noisy, too dim, too hot, too cluttered, our students' brains are already fighting a battle before they even begin to learn. Okay, so what are the things that we have to keep into consideration? So first, the lighting. So clarity creates calm. So students in naturally lit classrooms, um, some research said that they scored around 30% higher on reading and math as compared to those students who um, are in dimly lit classrooms. So, what does that entail for us teachers? So, uncover windows, use indirect light, and then soften the harsh fluorescent tones when we're using light inside the classroom. And then, second, acoustics, right? So the noise becomes behavior. So if there's chronic noise, right? So for example, if the classroom is right beside the railway system, katabi ng MRT or LRT, or along the highway where there's always congestion, or when classrooms have thin walls between them, so the noise disrupts the routines, disrupts reading comprehension when they're reading. So in a in a research done in just this year, so it says that poor acoustics are reported in 14 to 21% of schools in the US. So imagine the figures if we look at the context of the Philippines, right? So how do we soften these noises? The use of rugs, because they absorb the bounce of the noise. Soft wall surfaces if possible. The use of curtains also, right? Or book displays to absorb the sounds, right? And then third one is temperature, right? So optimal learning temperature according to um, studies 68 to 74 degrees Fahrenheit. And beyond that range, cognitive performance drops sharply. So, again, thinking about the context of the Philippines, right? So, imagine the heat wave during the summer. So, that in itself, our students are already contending with, not even starting with the lessons that they have to understand. And another one is air quality. So low air quality reduces attendance and teacher energy and student energy. And lastly, accessibility. So include design that benefits everyone, right? So universal design for learning, UDL, so that encourages clear pathways, reachable materials, multisensory access. So you have to keep in mind that if students can't be physically or cognitive, if they can't physically or cognitively access this space, then they'll disengage for sure before the lesson even starts, right? So again, these five things are the physical foundations, the part of the environment that students actually feel, that they actually see, that they actually get to touch. Now, let's move on to what they see, what they can read, what they can absorb. So those are the silent signals that speak volumes, even when sometimes we don't necessarily think about them, right? So now we go to the symbolic environment, right? Now, once the classroom's physical structure is sound, the environment also starts to whisper subtler messages, right? And what are these? Um, these are what I'd like to call the silent signals, right? The non-verbal messages that our classrooms send to our students day in and day out. Okay, so the first one is when we look at the space, our classroom's layout does not just hold students, right? So the classroom layout actually teaches them. And what does that mean? So the way the desks, the materials, the pathways are arranged, they signal how we expect our students to move, to relate to each other, and to learn. Right? So, alin ba dito yung magsasabi na, oh, talk it through, solve it together? Or what kind of setup would tell them, oh, you have to really focus and work independently, right? So every layout teaches behavior even before we teachers speak about what we expect from them. All right. One of the most powerful tool then that we have in our classroom management toolbox is seating arrangement. Okay, so the way we position chairs and tables tells our students how to think, how to talk, how to move. So whether we realize it or not, our layout sets the um like a social script for learning. So for example, when we have a U-shaped seating, what does it tell our students? So a U-shaped seating invites conversation, right? So it is an open layout for relationship building. So if it's a U-shaped seating arrangement, and then every student can see each other, and you also as a teacher can see everybody. So that setup is ideal for discussions, for community time. So what does it teach our students? So our students will feel that, oh, we're learning together. Oh, they can hear me, they can listen to me, they will listen to me. And if it is that open of a space, they'll have to regulate that, oh, well, we all have to stay engaged. No one is hidden in that kind of setup, right? So again, benefits of it: high visibility for teachers, promotes whole group dialogue, um, encourages active learning and peer interaction because they can see themselves face to face, and builds a sense of equality. Everyone is in that line, right? Everyone's in the line of vision of teacher. No one's in front, no one's at the back. But again, you have to watch out for, right? So not all our classrooms will have that much space. And again, this one is not ideal for independent work. So again, a U-shaped setting. So we're in this conversation together. And then what about clusters or pods? So this highlights collaboration. So let's work together as a team. So this is perfect for problem solving, for project-based learning, cooperative discussions. So similar to the U-shaped seating, we solve problems together. Everyone's ideas are welcome. Learning is social. And then the next one is flexible sitting. So, what does this tell our students? So, you have a choice, right? So, especially for younger learners, it honors their number one individuality, but also their capacity, because not all children would develop um, the ability to sit for long, for example, at the same time, right? So, it honors movement, comfort, and independence. But you see, this kind of flexibility, there would be some who would say that, oh, but it's chaotic, right? This kind of flexibility, again, relating it to the previous topic that I talked about, flexibility isn't chaos. It just needs boundaries and purpose, right? So if you have this kind of sitting inside the classroom, I can make choices about how I learn. So that's what they will that's how they understand the cue of the environment. And we as teachers, we have to also remember that sometimes the body and the brain have different needs, right? So we have to afford our students comfort is also connected to focus. So we have to think of making them feel comfortable before they can actually pay attention to what we're saying. Okay. And lastly, circle or community seating. So again, there's equality, there's connection, and circles. If you'll see it, it erases hierarchy. There's no front, there's no back. Um, everyone's voice carries the same weight there, right? So now putting all of these four together, is one seating better than the other? So answer there is no. No single seating arrangement is the best. It's all about the alignment, right? The goal for us teachers is to match your physical design to your instructional design, right? So when we do that, our environment becomes our silent co-teacher. Okay, sorry. All right. Now we go to the different research that um, supports the understanding of how the space shapes behavior of students. So, for example, um, let's think of examples of how to contextualize. So, for example, a fifth grade teacher notices constant side chattering during group lessons, right? So, she arranges her room, so rows for mini lessons, and then clusters for collaboration. And then when I talked to this fifth grade teacher, within days, she noticed that um, the noise level decreased and engagement rose, because again, the students were able to get the routine that, oh, if we're in rows and then we have to focus, and if we are in clusters and then it's more of group work that we have to do. So again, apart from the seating arrangement, we could also use visual zoning, right? So for example, you put in your classroom, this is a focus corner, this is a collaboration space, or this is a calm area. So again, predictability. So where no matter where your students are in the learning continuum, so it works for them. So also apart from the seating, so we should also think about the movement pathways that we provide our students. So avoid bottlenecks, for instance, or avoid blind spots when you are fixing the classroom. Okay. So that's the first one. So the space. Now, the second one, the second silent signal is the visual climate, right? So teachers, we are crafty, we love color, we have the patience, and we love to decorate the classroom, right? So, but again, we have to make clear that decorating and designing are not the same thing, right? So the decoration fills the space, and then the design teaches our students, right? Now, what story is your classroom telling? So, um, so Rodriguez and Panderada says that students in highly decorated rooms performed worse on memory and attention tasks. And then Fisher and others says that overstimulating classrooms increase off-task behavior. Barrett and others says that classrooms with 20 to 50% of wall space open had the best focus and achievement outcomes. And then Charian and others say that decor and objects communicate belonging, who fits in, who does not. So um remember several like several years ago, a few years ago, right? So there was this movement in public schools where they're asking teachers to put down all of um the decorations, the materials on the walls. So there is there is merit to that if we go by these research, but that doesn't mean that your classrooms should really be bare, right? So what should it be then? So if we are talking about decoration and designing our classrooms, so here, so these are snippets from my own classroom. So the classroom again is seen as a third teacher, and the walls are its like the walls are the voice, right? And what's important is those walls are not covered in posters or pre-made charts. Again, like what I was talking about a while ago, they are living records of learning. So the the walls of our classroom should help us document the learning of our students, right? So documentation, it's not really about display, but it's about meaning making of what's happening inside the classroom. So our documentation, what we put on our walls, that's an actual practice of making learning visible, right? Through photographs, direct quotations of what the students are saying, work samples, for older students, even reflections, visual narratives that involve our students themselves, right? So again, what do we have to keep in mind for that? We have to reflect the thinking, the process of how they did things, and not just the product, right? And it's ongoing. It's an ongoing story. So displays are revisited, some are added to, some are changed as learning deepens. And then it's important also that we communicate shared ownership with our students. So the students, not just us teachers, we co-curate what goes on the walls of our rooms. And the walls are actually interpretative spaces. So when they look at the walls, when our students look at the walls, they'd be reminded, oh, what are we exploring here again? What did we discover? what can we discover more? Right. So, um, yeah, so there. So it's again, it's not just the product, but again, the story behind what we document. And then the third one are belonging cues. So this is the third. So the first one are the space is the space. And then the second one is the visual climate, what they see. And then the third are belonging cues, representation and ownership. So all of our classrooms, again, they whisper silently a message about who belongs. And research has shown again and again that the environment directly affects how deeply our students engage, how safe they feel, and even how they all perform, right? So, um, for the first one here, Cherian, classrooms with inclusive imagery boost student engagement and achievement. So, when students see images that represent people like them or values they share, they feel included and perform better. On the other hand, conversely, when students see images um, filled with symbols of dominance or the lack of diversity, so students from marginalized backgrounds may disengage. So in the Filipino context, how does that translate? Um, for example, um, if you're there's a science corner, for instance, inside your classroom, and then instead of putting great scientists like Einstein and Newton, if you include local Filipino scientists like Pedal Mundo, um, so you'll see how they can connect and how you can encourage connection with your students. So for example, for Fedel Mundo, so your students might feel, oh, pwede palang maging scientist kahit babae, right? So I didn't know women could be scientists as well, right? And then the second one, um, about belonging and self-esteem for marginalized groups. Okay, so really, it's all about diversity and inclusion inside the classroom so that they will feel that they are well represented. Especially, for instance, if you have Muslims in your classroom, if you have from from other ethnic groups as well. And lastly, so Padrosa co-created spaces reduce behavioral issues, right? So um again, let students co-create, for example, class rules, the walls, the displays, and that will ensue and make them feel that, oh, this is our shared space, right? So what are our practical moves then as teachers? So again, display students' work and thinking, not just commercially bought materials. Um, rotate our displays to reflect the current learning of our students and keep the relevance of the classroom walls fresh. So for those, for example, who are in Visayas or Mindanao, or for those places which have dialects, So include photos, include cultural artifacts, multilingual signages that mirror your actual students' language. And then again, for ownership, we highlight not just those quote unquote outstanding work, right? So there's this connotation that only the best works are displayed. So we have to unlearn that and make our students unlearn it too. So highlight different kinds of excellence. So that could be creativity, that could be kindness, that could be perseverance. So not just grades, right? And like what I mentioned a while ago, co-create classroom agreements and post them visibly. So you see, when our students see themselves on our walls, they see themselves as part of the learning process, right? So, um, again, so far, um, our classrooms have taught focus through visuals, through the structures of your play, of your space, and the belonging through the representation that we just talked about, right? So again, always keep in mind that every poster, every picture, every display that you put up sends a message. And what message do we want to tell our students? So make sure that what we put up says that, again, you are seen, you're capable, and you belong here. So, for example, this is an actual um, class discussion when we came up with our rules inside the classroom, right? So, we talked about the rules. What are rules? Why are they for? And then we came up with the rules. So I asked the students what rules do they think should be there inside the classroom, expectations, agreements. So once they gave the agreements inside the classroom, so you see those dots. So those are actually their thumbprints. So there's ownership in the rules inside the classroom. And again, this is important because when students have ownership of what's happening inside the classroom, they they're more likely to follow through because they feel that, oh, this came from me, I have to follow, I agreed to this. So there's more, what do you call this, there's more accountability on their part as well. So these are the actual classroom rules. But then you see, when you invite them to do these things, so they could also incorporate it in place. So for example, they made their own classroom rules. They made their own rules, and they're saying that this certain part of our classroom is just for kids, right? So they're saying, we are sorry, teachers, for boys and girls only. And then, yeah, they're saying, so there, for kids, no teacher Mel. And then they're saying that it's actually their fun club, right? So, you're socializing also in this way. So you see, you're saying na they're just pretend playing, but really, this is like a microcosm of what happens in the community as well, right? So, respecting their boundaries also and taking ownership of the play that they're putting. Okay. And this is very important, right? So, um, this is me trying to tell you that you have to check your classroom. You have to always have your classroom's wellness in check. And I'm saying that, you know how teachers turn to Pinterest when they want to set up something inside the classroom, right? So, while that is good, while we want the aesthetics, so it's not all about that Pinterest perfect decor, right? But it's more about the purposeful design of our classrooms. So again, the classroom's goal isn't about more color or less color. It's the right kind of cues that teach calm, belonging, and clarity. So, visual climate, again, we talked about the 20-50% wall space clear. Um, Visuals should be current and relevant. Lighting is natural and soft. For spatial flow, layout supports the day's learning mode. So if it is um, a focused mode and then you do rows, or if it's all about teamwork, you do pods. If you want to encourage discussion and then you do the U-shaped. Again, clear and predictable walking paths, also the pathways of how they'll move around in the classroom, and defined zones also for your spatial flow. So where's your focus zone, where's your collaboration zone, where's your calm zone. And then for belonging cues, we display the works of our children, we keep them updated, um, make it inclusive, culturally responsive imagery, and again, co created norms, visible and revisited with our students. So, again, something to think about. If my classroom was silent, what would your classroom say to your students? And what would your classroom say about you? Okay. So again, when we think of classroom management, we readily think of the words that we use, right? So the reminders, the redirections, the rules. But in truth, our classrooms, they're managing our students for us all day long, right? Through the air, through the lighting, through the the arrangement of the furniture. And you see, when our environment tells students, and when it whispers safety, belonging, and focus, our students listen, right? So again, our environment could be part of our hidden curriculum, and your space has a hidden curriculum. When the physical foundation meets the intentional symbolism that we talked about, our classrooms become self-regulating spaces, right? And at the end of the day, what we want is a classroom, again, that whispers calm, curiosity, care, and connection. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention today.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Mel. I'm now going to flash on screen the QR code for the certificate, and I will also post in the chat box the link to claim the certificate. Okay, there you go. You can click on the link now, which is there posted in the chat box, and fill up the form, or you can scan the QR code so that you can get to the Google form. Okay, well, with that, we end our session today. Once again, thank you so much, Miss Mel, for the session. And we hope to see you all in our other future webinars. Goodbye, everyone. We're going to close the Zoom room in three, two, bye, and one.